So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. So we are going to be looking at the new job support scheme, which has been announced, and the detail was announced only last Thursday. So it's been quite a quick turnaround on the session this morning. Let me just see if I can get my PowerPoint to work. Oh, there we go. I've just noticed actually that we've got the wrong date on there, so it is Tuesday, just in case anyone was wondering if they'd woken up 2 days later. It is only Tuesday. So I'm going to be your host today, and the plan today is that I'm going to give you a quick overview summary of what we know about the new job support scheme and the details that have been released. There are some grey areas, as there always are, and we're getting used to that now, but I'll tell you what we do know. And then I'll give you opportunity to ask questions at the end. So we have had some questions that have been submitted prior to the session today, so I'll deal with those first. And then anyone that's got any questions, if you pop them in the Q&A box, which you should be able to see on your screens rather than the comments box. But we'll try and just pick them up wherever they are. If you just get them down, we'll deal with them at the end of the session. We are recording the session today, and assuming we've got no technical difficulties, we will share the recording and circulate slides after this morning's meeting. So let's jump right in. So the end of this month, we'll see the end of furlough. I feel like furlough's been around now forever, and it's not. But yeah, we're going to see the end of the furlough scheme. And obviously the plan was for the government support to finish as of the end of this month, and that's obviously changed for obvious reasons. But there will be no more, I'm calling it full-time furloughing, but there'll be no more furloughing given employees at all, and we'll move on to the new scheme with effect from the 1st of next month. So if you've got anyone still on furlough, obviously you need to start thinking about what you're going to be doing with those, and I'm hoping that you're already in communication with those people now about getting them back to work or what it is you're going to do. You've got to get your claims in for the furlough scheme by the end of November. And it's also important for you to know that if you've got any concerns or any suspicions that there might have been any overclaims or overpayments under that scheme during the period it's been running, it's the best thing to do is try and rectify those before the end of the claim period, just so that if there is a HMRC inspection at some stage, that obviously you have been compliant and you've not overclaimed without double checking that. So that's the key date, is to make sure you get your claims in by the end of next month. If you need any support, obviously, with getting any employees back to work, or you're getting any issues with employees not wanting to come back to work, or they might be on long-term absence and furlough's been a convenient way of dealing with them, then obviously reach out to us, get in touch, and we'll help you with those particular cases. So what do we move to? So we're moving to the job support scheme, which has been dubbed the JSS. That's our new lingo. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next 6 months. And that's how long it's in place for at the moment. It's going to run for 6 months until the end of April next year, which is a bit of a scary thought. When I was writing the session yesterday, I thought, oh, I just hope we don't need it next April, because that's quite depressing, really, isn't it? But they have said, the government, that they will review it in January. So obviously, depending on how things are going, there might be a review of the scheme in January. So the scheme is going to be a little bit different to the furlough scheme in some ways. There's quite a lot of similarities, but there are some differences. And one of the key points that I noted when I was looking at the information is that the claims now will be paid in arrears for the month before. So whereas under the furlough scheme you could actually claim for periods that you hadn't yet paid out, that's not going to be the case. You have to have paid your employees what they're due, and then you can then claim for that in the following month. So the actual claims portal is not going to open on this scheme until the 8th of December. My assumption on that is because obviously they're trying to avoid any sort of businesses that are really struggling and shouldn't necessarily be relying on the support. They should be looking at other options to avoid them just using the scheme as a crutch. Really, this isn't what it's intended to be. So the whole point of the scheme and the government's rationale behind the scheme is that they're obviously trying to encourage employers to avoid redundancies. That's the key element. And so one of the key factors of this scheme is that you can't use it for any employees that are being made redundant or serving their notice periods. So that is different to the furlough scheme, because obviously it was quite a nice help when you were making redundancies, that you could use the furlough monies towards notice pay. Well, that's not gonna wash anymore, and actually you won't be able to use it for any employees who are making redundant. It's not yet clear whether you'll be able to use it during consultation. So say if you're thinking about making redundancies, you might be consulting with 20 people, they won't all be made redundant. Does that stop you making a claim for any of those people during that consultation period? We don't know that yet, so that'll just be an interesting to see how that comes through when further information is released. So the way that the government have done it, and what became apparent last week, is that there's one scheme, but there's two parts to it, and the government have called it the JSS Open and the JSS Closed. And it does what it says on the tin. The first part of the scheme, the JSS Open, is to help those businesses that are still operational, so they're still able to operate and still able to function but need some support. And the JSS Closed is for businesses that have been subject to forced closure. So we'll go on to look at those two schemes now. So first one is for those businesses that are up and running, they're open, but facing reduced demand. That's what they've said. They've said it's for those employers who are facing decreased demand. And what the scheme says is that as long as an employee is working at least 20% of their hours, so if you've got full-time worker, that's 1 day out of 5, as long as they're working for that 1 day and they're being paid in full as normal for that 1 day, then you can use the scheme for the rest of their working hours. And what that will look like is that you pay the employee for the hours that they actually work. They don't just have to work 20%, they could work 30, 40, whatever agreement you reach. And then for the hours that they're not working, the employees will receive 2/3 of their pay. And how that 2/3 is made up is 5% comes from the business, from the employer, and 61.67% comes from the government. So it's a really generous scheme, actually. It's a massive improvement from what we originally thought was going to be the support. It will be a help to many. There is a cap, as there was with the furlough scheme, and the caps are based on a monthly salary of £3,125. I've had lots of questions from employers on whether these amounts can be topped up. Yes, you can. It's totally up to you. It's at your discretion. You can top up employees' payments. Just make sure you're doing it fairly. Don't be selective in terms of who you're doing it for and who you're not. If that could cause you any issues of discrimination or anything like that, so just be mindful. But yes, you can use your discretion to top up. One of the key points to note is that the employer is still responsible for all the national insurance contributions and any auto-enrolment pension contributions due on the whole amount. So you're responsible even for the government side of the support. That's something to know. Very much like the Flexi Furlough scheme, employers can cycle on and off it. So you can have them on it for a couple of weeks and then back to normal and then on and off. The only caveat to that is they've got to have the scheme in place for at least 7 consecutive days. So you've got to put them on there for at least a week. But then after that, you can be flexible with how you want to work it. In terms of access to the scheme, so we'll come on to this in terms of eligibility, but one point to note here is that if you are classed as a large employer, then there will be a financial impact test, and we'll come on to look at what that is. The JSS Closed, this is for businesses who are legally required to close. So it's not for those businesses who close because they've reduced demand, it's only those businesses who have to legally close. And what the scheme provides there is that the government will pay 2/3 of the employees' normal pay up to a cap of £2,083.33 a month. So business doesn't have to contribute to that. Again, you can top up if you want to, but you don't have to. But again, the business is responsible for all the NICs and auto-enrolment pension contributions due. on the whole of those 2/3. Unlike the open scheme, there isn't a financial impact test for large employers, but there is an expectation that those larger employers won't make any capital distributions of any kind. So moving on to look at eligibility. So in terms of employees, it's similar to the Furlough scheme. They've had a cut-off point. So the new cut-off point is the 23rd of September 2020. So if they were on your PAYE payroll on that date, then they're eligible. They don't have to have previously been furloughed. So they could be, they could have joined you in June, for example, this year, and they will be eligible for this scheme. Again, like the furlough scheme, it covers all ranges of employees. So you've got your 0 hours, your temporary workers, your agency workers. So plenty of those employees are covered. Moving to employer eligibility, again, like the furlough scheme, you've got to have a UK bank account, you've got to have a UK PAYE scheme. All SMEs, regardless of sector, can participate in both schemes. Larger businesses, and the government thankfully have kept the test for larger businesses relatively clean. It's simply those businesses who have 250 or more employees classed as larger businesses. And if you are a large business, then you will have a financial impact test for the open side of the scheme. So what that impact test is, in simple terms, is that you have suffered reduced turnover, or your turnover has remained the same. So if you can demonstrate that, and the way they're going to test it is they're going to look at VAT submissions, VAT returns, and they're going to compare those to the same period of the VAT return last year. So as a business, you only have to go through that test, that financial test once, before the first time you claim, and then after that, it will be a case of, right, you're eligible or you're not. They haven't yet said what the test will be for those employers who are large but aren't VAT registered, but I can't imagine that there are many out there that aren't. Charities are excluded, so when you've had charity clients, then you're not subject to the financial impact test. But in that way, it is quite a simplistic approach to the larger business test. The government have said that whilst it won't be a legal or contractual requirement, they have an expectation that larger businesses won't be using the schemes if they're going to be making any capital distributions of any kind. So what they're saying is, be responsible, it's public money, we won't put it to a sort of legal stringent test, but be mindful. In terms of reference salary, so again, it follows a similar methodology for the calculation of the furlough scheme, so you'll be getting used to this by now if you've made use of that before. I've put up on the slide there the approach that needs to be taken. So obviously it's very simple really in terms of those employees who are on a fixed wage, and then those employees who have variable pay. Again, you can include all the things that you would have included on the furlough scheme, so things like obligatory commissions or bonuses of any kind, and then you would have a look at a reference period, and what the government have said is that you can take the greater of, and they've listed there the greater of which factors. So again, it's similar to the furlough scheme, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Again, reference hours in terms of calculating normal hours for the open scheme. Again, that's a similar reference period, looking at hours worked in a similar period of last year. Okay, so just some general points to note. One of the key points is that again, like under the furlough scheme, you've got to have a written agreement with the employees, so it's got to be in writing. What they've said this time round, this is an important point to note, is that what you can't do is claim for any periods prior to that written agreement being reached. So in the furlough scheme, obviously, we had that situation where you could put it in writing, you could backdate the situation. What they're saying here is, no, that's not possible. What you've got to do is discuss it with your employees, agree what you're going to do, put it in writing, and only from that date can you then claim. So if you've got an intention to use this scheme for any employees from the first day, i.e. the 1st of November, then you've got to be pretty sharpish and get your written agreements in place. We sent written agreement templates out to our retainer bank yesterday. So all our retainer clients will have those now, and obviously get in touch if you want some help completing those. For anyone who's not a retained client, get in touch with us after the session, and we can discuss the templates that we've got available for you. And also, if you're interested in the benefits of becoming one of our retainer clients, then that's something obviously we can happily discuss with you. It's a really important point to note that. And I got some questions yesterday just on the fact of, do we have to have the written agreement in place before the 1st of November, even if we're not going to claim from the 1st? And no, that's not the case. It's only before the period for which you're going to claim. So if you don't use this until December, you don't have to have your written agreements in place until the point at which you want to claim. So just to clarify that. I've already discussed the point about the fact that claims in arrears for the previous month, you've got to actually pay those out. So November, for example, if you pay at the end of the month, you'll pay your employees as normal, then the portal will open on the 8th of December, and you can claim them for the November period, and that'll be the same every month. Again, like the furlough scheme, just make sure you're keeping written records of all the hours that your employees are working and not working. Again, you've got to keep those for 5 years. So again, I'm sure you're used to doing that by now. And the government have come out and said that there will be penalties for fraudulent claims. They said that can be up to 100% of the claim amount, so it could be quite substantial for some businesses. And what they've said is that there is also a threat now being named and shamed. So like under the National Minimum Wage Breach regulations, if you are, you're claiming fraudulently into the scheme, and they will name and shame you to the public, which is not ideal. So that covers off the sort of main points. I'm aware that there might be some questions, and applications to particular employees or situations might vary, but we'll see what questions we get at the end, and likewise, if you've got anything you want to speak to us about afterwards, then get in touch. I wanted to touch upon the job retention bonus. That's still here, that's still happening, and from a comfort perspective, what the government have said is that employers will still be able to take advantage of this job retention bonus, even if they're taking advantage of the JSS as well. So that's good. So for those of you who haven't heard of it yet, just a quick summary. For any employees that have previously been furloughed, if they're still in your employment at the end of January 2021, you can claim a £1,000 job retention bonus for each employee, as long as you have kept them in employment and they've earned at least £520 on average in each month from November through to Jan. The government have said is that any payments made under the JSS will count towards that £520. Again, I think that's great, and it's really generous. So that's something to be thinking about in terms of planning budgeting for next year. And before we move to the Q&A session, I just thought it'd be good to give you a bit of a feel for how we're finding things, generally speaking, in employment law, and how things, are happening in practice. It's safe to say, as you would expect, that it has been a very, very challenging period for employment law over the last 7-8 months. But where we've come to now is we're now in a situation where we're finding that general employee relations issues are becoming extremely difficult and protracted. And I've spoken with a number of clients about this over the last month or so. And what we're finding is that what would normally be a straightforward disciplinary grievance redundancy process, we're actually finding that employees are being quite difficult, they're pushing back. Employment tribunal claims have absolutely shot up through the roof. So we are seeing that sort of kickback really, and it just shows that the sort of economic and social landscape is having an impact on behaviours and the way people are dealing with things. It's just something to be mindful of, that actually, if you are looking at entering into any processes, it's so important to follow a fair procedure, even now more than ever. So, we are advising now that you're absolutely spot on with the things that you're doing, because claims are, they're out there. We're seeing a massive rise. It's obviously free for employees to raise claims. So at the end of the day, if they're out of a job or they're disgruntled for any reason, it's relatively easy for them to raise a claim and cause you some trouble. So I just wanted to mention that because it is something that, as I say, that it has changed. Definitely, you know, a massive shift from what we would have seen 12 months ago. So now we're going to jump on to some questions, see what's come in. So I'm going to ask Alex to read those questions out for me, and then I'll answer them. And then, like I say, if you've got any other questions that you want to pop in, then we'll deal with those. Yes, so I think the question there is, you've got reduced demands, you've got people working between 30 and 40 hours, you want to use the JSS Open scheme, so look to put them on shorter time working, that's fine. If you want to top up, again, that's fine. I think that's the question. Clarify it if it's not, guys. But yes, on the basis of what's been said, then you'll be able to use the scheme for that. Okay. Very good question. So the government actually haven't said anything on holidays and sickness absence in relation to the JSS. And it's, again, my view would be that it will probably be a similar approach to the furlough scheme. So my view is on sickness, if you've got someone who's on the JSS and they are sick, then my view would be that it would be at the employer's discretion as to whether you use the JSS to pay the wages or you use SSP. But we don't know yet, so that'll be confirmed. In terms of annual leave, again, they've not said anything. So again, I'd hope that they take a similar approach and the annual leave days can fall on JSS days. Okay. Okay, so next question. I think some people are struggling to hear Alex, so sorry about that. Let's try again.
So we've got a question regarding the hybrid lockdown in Wales.
Oh yes.
What's going on? Are there any separate schemes for businesses within Wales?
So if you didn't hear that, the question was about any businesses in Wales, because obviously they're under a separate regime at the moment with the lockdown. So in terms of the government support obviously applies to Wales as it does everywhere else. I'm not aware of any separate schemes. There might, unless there are any local government schemes in place, I'm not aware of those. But yeah, the scheme will apply to Wales, and obviously if you've been subject to a forced closure, then you would use the JSS Closed as opposed to the JSS Open. Okay, next question.
Yeah, we've got another question. Are there any changes to consider to the usual process where you may need to let an employee go during the probation period?
So if you've got an employee during your probationary period and you want to let them go, then ordinarily I'd just say, well, have a review meeting, have the discussion and move on. I'd say just tread a little bit more carefully on that. You can obviously still do it because that's the whole point of the probationary period, that you review their performance and you make a decision. But what I would do would be that I would invite them to a formal probationary review meeting, give them some notice of it, have a detailed discussion about the feedback on the probationary period and what areas that you're unhappy with as an employer. And then I would follow that up with quite a detailed probation termination letter to set out exactly why they've not met those standards. Just so that you can, we're completely clear on the reasons and there can be no argument that it's for any other reason. I'm dealing with one at the moment where we did that back in August, and now the employee is raised a claim to say that actually you failed my probation period because I was suffering from mental health. We didn't know anything about the mental health, but it just goes to show that actually employees are challenging decisions that they wouldn't ordinarily.
Yeah,
okay.
Another question about the financial impact test for companies with over 250 staff.
Yeah.
Is it only the turnover that's being used as a measure for eligibility?
Yes, that's right. So on the financial impact test, that's right, it's only turnover. So they're going to look at your turnover, whether that's reduced or stayed the same, and they're going to use They're going to use your sales figures on your VAT returns to conclude that. And there is some further guidance on the sort of VAT periods and the comparisons, and I can share those after the session. Okay.
I've got another question. If the only work I have available is different to someone's normal work, can I ask them to carry it out for their 20% normal working hours?
Okay, so so if you didn't hear that, the question was, if you've got an employee who you've not got any work for in their normal position, but you could find 20% work for that employee, say doing something else, could you do that? Under the scheme, absolutely, as long as they're working, that's fine. Just with the employee, they'll just make sure that you are obviously approaching that delicately if it's a more sort of junior role or something that the employee might not want to do. In the majority of employment contracts, you reserve the right to distribute alternative job duties. So I'd like to think you'd be able to rely on that contractual position anyway. But again, it's just about discussing that with the employee and the rationale, and hopefully employees will be reasonable to that approach.
And we have another question. What should we do if the working week straddles the furlough job retention scheme and the new job support scheme?
Okay, so if you've got a situation where, so what have we got here? So the furlough scheme will end on Saturday, that's right, isn't it? And then the job support scheme will kick in on Sunday, so it falls over a weekend. So what you would have to do that is you'd have to submit separate claims for that working week, which is a bit of a faff, but it's the only way that you're going to be able to do it. So you're going to have to claim up to the end of October under the furlough scheme as you would, and then you're going to have to then submit a separate claim for the one day of this month, and then rolling into November. No, that's not right. That's the one day of this week that rolls into November. That's what I mean.
One more question is,
okay.
Do you need to give a period of notice to the employees when you'd like them to work? For example, if the needs of the business change week on week, can you just tell them the week before what day you'd like them to work?
That's a good question. So just to clarify that question, so what the question is do you have to give employees a set amount of notice if you want to vary their working week, their working hours, their arrangement? No, the answer is you don't. So there's no sort of set where you've got to give an employee a week's notice to change. Just some key considerations. As always, an implied term of any employment contract, of any employment relationship, is you're expected as an employee to be reasonable. So as long as you're behaving reasonably, then that's fine. Obviously, the business needs will change in a time like this where there's obviously a lot of uncertainty. Then there's an expectation that actually your needs might change on a weekly basis, so that's fine. Just make sure that you are making any changes in those week blocks. So thinking about making sure that you've got at least 7 consecutive days, and you are setting it all out in writing, so you're agreeing and recording, those working patterns properly.
That's all the questions we've got.
And that's all the questions. And that is 10 AM and that is 60 minutes exactly, so absolutely perfect. Thanks everyone for joining. I hope it's been helpful. As always, we're here if you've got any questions. I'm sure I'll have some. And I will circulate the recording and the slides afterwards if you want to share those out. So thank you everyone, have a great day. See you all soon.